Good evening, everyone. Yeah, good evening, everyone. My name's Councillor Monday. I'm Chair of the Planning Committee, and just want to welcome you to tonight's committee. And just to flag that there are no fire drills planned tonight. So if you do hear the alarms, follow us swiftly out the exits either side. The agenda will be taken as in order, and we'll take the last item of business at around 10:30, and we'll take a short break after approximately 1.5 hours. So those in the room, please do take water. It can get very hot. And I'm just going to outline the process for those new here to committee and those watching online as well. Each item follows in this same process. So officer presentation, presents an application and references the modification sheet. You can get those documents online. Then speaking for up to 3 minutes would be objectors first, and then 2 minutes each will be ward councillors. And then the applicant and agent will have an opportunity to speak up for a total of 6 minutes. And then any cabinet members in the room as well. And then finally, we finish off with an officer response who may reference some of the points made or come back on points of fact or questions raised. And then we'll follow in that feedback. The committee will then have an opportunity to ask questions of both officers, but also of applicants and anyone who speaks. But these questions are to be point of fact and not give an opportunity to extend speaking time. We'll then move on to comments and general observations. And we may need to debate or agree on additional conditions or an issue. So you would see that. And then we'll move to a vote on the recommendation as on the paper in the following order. So those voting against first, those not voting, and those voting for. So can I start off with any declarations of interest? None? Fantastic. Minutes from the last meeting. Can I have a seconder that they are true and accurate account? Thank you very much, Ed. So we are now going to move on to our first application. So that's Wimbledon Chase, 45 to 48 Station Road, 74 residential flats, including 20% affordable, with measures to support step-free access. Tim Lipscomb, please kick us off.
Thank you, Chair. I'll just share my screen. Good evening, members. Here you can see the site location outlined in red. This is Wimbledon Chase Station with the railway line, and then Wimbledon Chase Neighbourhood Parade with the co-op slightly further down here out of view of this map. The area is one of suburbia, then with a local centre and buildings up to 5 stories within the local centre. It is within flood zone 1, but at risk of surface water flooding, has a public transport accessibility level of 3 and is within a controlled parking zone. You can see that the current site includes the station and then 2 sets of masonettes directly to the north, which are here. Those would be demolished as part of the proposals. This is the layout of the existing station. So a sort of a diagonal layout with a central access. Here is the site layout with the proposed building. So it's a building between, well, up to 9 stories, but transitioning down towards the north. So on this plan, north is orientated to the right. It would provide 74 flats, 155 square meters of retail. Now the proposal is set out at page 9, so this is a summary here. A new station entrance, which will be here. A communal residence room, which you can actually see on this plan, which is this space here at ground floor. Green roofs and amenity spaces at various levels. The scheme steps back on this boundary and this boundary to create a transition. It would be cream brickwork and buff brick in terms of materials. I'd take you through the area. So the existing station, and then this is a view standing on at the car park of Great Expectations, which is the existing shop, which has got sort of a split unit either side of the station. Here you can see inside the station itself. This is the other part of the shop, which fronts directly onto Kingston Road, and this is the location where the new station entrance would be. This is the building opposite, which is one of the 5-storey buildings in the parade. And then this is along Rothesay Avenue, which is adjacent to the site. And then a view across the road. So this is the 5-storey building, another building within the neighbourhood parade. The views from the train track, so you can see that same building, which I pointed out. So the site is just in there. And then a view from Chaseside Avenue. This is a potential area for future step-free proposals that may be used to tunnel in from this side of the railway line. So going through the plans, this is the ground floor. So the retail unit would be at the front, the station entrance to the side. Future step-free, although not part of this proposal, is likely to spur off from here into a tunnel, which would then lead to a lift. Here you can see the Network Rail back of house facilities, which are currently sort of around here, and a dedicated entrance so that Network Rail vehicles can be kept off the street. The entrance to the South Core here, entrance to the North Core, and a bike store associated with each core. And then, as I mentioned, that communal facilities for residents in the centre there. Taking you up through the various floors, it's residential above. These units are the affordable housing units. So you can see that they're in the North Core, and the idea has been to try and provide some dual aspect outlook for those units. So moving up the floors, see the 2 cores providing access. The building steps in, which allows an opportunity to provide for some communal roof terraces. And again, you see it stepping in as it goes up higher in order to achieve that transition. There, we're just going to move this so you can see which floor it is. So this is the 7th floor, 8th floor, again with more amenity space. And then the roof plan, which is a biodiverse green roof with a blue water attenuation element beneath that. Air source heat pumps here, and solar panels on the roof here. In terms of elevations, that's your front elevation. So you have the head of the building, and then the body behind it, which gradually steps down. This is a view from Rothesay Avenue, or the elevation from Rothesay Avenue. And this is the view, Rothesay Avenue here. So looking onto the back, if you like, of the development, you can see the platform over there. Moving on to some CGIs of how it would appear when in place. So you can see the building there with wraparound signage, and then the entrance to the station here. And again, before and after type view. The new entrance to the station, which would provide a number of new facilities, new PA systems, barriers, as the existing station is quite tired. Again, another view in the street scene. Views from the rear showing those various transitioning levels. And here you can see the head and the body of the building tailing out behind it. Now I'll just take you through some other views so you can get an idea of how it would appear in situ. These ones are View City Townscape Views, which is a software that allows you to insert a model of a building in London, and the idea is it gives you an idea of the visual impact. So you can see there's a number of viewpoints. I'll take you through these fairly quickly because a lot of them well, you can't see the building. But the various views, to just give you a flavour of its impact when viewed from the wider surroundings. In terms of highway arrangements, the existing car park, which is associated with the fireplace shop, would be removed. 2 existing parking bays here would be relocated onto Rothesay Avenue. A 17.5 metre long loading bay is proposed to the frontage with the curbs built out to allow for better sight lines than there would be otherwise. And the idea is that this mimics the layout at slightly further down the road where there's an existing lay-by. The scheme doesn't provide for off-street parking, but the plan is to have 3 blue badge holder spaces on the highway at 6.6 metres in length. The 2 spaces which are here would be relocated just out of view on this screen. This is the existing station and options for the future step-free access. The proposed arrangements would have it coming through here, which at the moment is back of house facilities. So it would allow for a slightly easier provision of the step-free access. There are 142 cycle parking spaces. The width of the pavement on Rothesay Avenue would be increased along here. As I say, the plans show how future step-free access could be achieved, but just to clarify, it does not form part of this current application. In terms of affordable housing, we have a 20% offer, which equates to 12 units with a 50-50 split between affordable rent and intermediate rent. And in terms, as I mentioned before, green and with blue elements underlying that for water attenuation and rainwater harvesting. Moving on to the key issues, the principle of development is at page 55. The provision of a commercial unit is supported here in the neighbourhood parade, replacing an existing shop. The new station entrance is also supported. And you'll also note that there's some commentary about housing need in the borough, the council's 5-year land supply, and the fact that currently Merton aren't hitting that 5-year land supply, which is a material consideration in any application that brings forward new housing. Moving on to the planning issues, housing mix is at page 57. And you'll see there are a limited number of 3 beds, but overall, given the location and the fact that it's in flats, that is considered acceptable. Affordable housing is at page 58. As I say, 20% is offered. The plans in the presentation show the location of those units, which are close to external amenity space and often benefiting from dual aspect. In terms of financial viability, we've had 2 reviews carried out, which were fairly consistent in their responses. Ultimately, very little affordable housing could be gleaned from the proposal on the basis of viability. At the moment, we have a roughly a £60,000 excess. So as it stands, any offer above a £60,000 contribution would be above and beyond what the financial viability would indicate is reasonable. So that is a benefit to the application to be taken into account by members. Moving on to design and visual impact, page 61. This is a matter of judgment. I won't go through it in too much detail because we do have it set out in the report, but to summarize the key issues, if I take you back to another image just for this part. Massing and height, it is a tall building in an area not identified for tall buildings. It is within a local centre. It does mark a transport interchange. It is a landmark building, and that is considered appropriate, marking the transport hub and within the neighbourhood centre. Ultimately, the matter is a matter of judgment for members. In terms of layout, the station entrance would remain prominent, and the layout is based on sound urban design principles. In terms of design and appearance, as I said before, two distinct parts, the head with the body behind and a staggered height to ensure a transition. And the materials have been carefully selected as a nod towards the railway and the historic use of the railway. In terms of neighbouring amenity, that's page 64. In terms of overlooking, the scheme would only overlook front elevations of neighbouring properties. Otherwise, screening and lack of windows to the north elevation would prevent overlooking. Daylight and sunlight, you'll see the detailed impacts are set out in the report. To summarise, there will be some reductions in daylight and sunlight. The site, or the development on the site currently is very low, so any additional development here will have an impact. The reductions experienced are within tolerances of what is generally held to be acceptable in London. And again, this is a matter of judgment for members. Moving on to the standard of accommodation, that's page 72. All units would meet or exceed the internal floor area requirements of the London Plan and the private amenity space quotas, with all units having balconies. In addition to that, communal amenity space and a shared residence room is provided, which is a benefit of the proposal. So overall, the standard of accommodation would be good and would exceed the minimum policy requirements. And we also will be looking to establish play area within those, or play equipment within those amenity spaces by way of condition. In terms of accessible housing, it meets the requirements of 10% of units being accessible. Transport, which is a key issue, page 73. No car parking, but in a neighbourhood centre by a transport interchange, and that is considered appropriate. 3 disabled bays on street. It is preferable to have them off street, in which case they can be allocated to individual occupiers of the development, whereas on street they could not be reserved for individual occupiers. The London Plan does, under some circumstances, allow for on-street provision. The network rail spaces would be off-street, so any parking demand that they create currently would be removed. Now, there is a new lay-by to the frontage proposed to allow for servicing. The servicing requirements of the retail unit would be very limited. It's been indicated it's likely to be a coffee shop or a convenience store, and we do have a condition preventing the use as a supermarket type use, which would have larger vehicles servicing it. Now, you will see that there's some discussion in the mod sheet in regards to the layout at the frontage. There has been a suggestion that the lay-by simply be omitted, allowing the 2 spaces to be retained, and the lay-by that's slightly further down the road be used as it would be used for servicing other properties, other commercial units along the neighbourhood parade. For clarity, there is a motorcycle bay opposite on Rothesay Avenue, but that is not affected. It's not part of the changes to bays, and there is an over provision of cycle spaces. So we'll be happy to go through any questions on the transport elements, but it looks like there is a solution if there is a concern over the loading bay due to sight lines and the potential for a high-sided vehicle to block sight lines when leaving Rothesay Avenue. Then it would be entirely reasonable that the site is serviced simply from the existing lay-by, as I say, as other units along there would be. There is currently a car park at the front of the site, but that doesn't allow for large vehicles to get into it and turn. So currently there is no off-street servicing for that unit for large vehicles. Moving on to flooding and site drainage, that's page 76. It's flood zone 1, but it isn't in an area identified at risk of surface water flooding. Now, in order to maintain step-free access other than to the platforms itself, the ground levels of the station can't realistically be built up above the potential flooding levels. However, there's an array of other mitigation measures, including a water entry strategy for the station, which will include a pump in the event of flooding. And again, as I said, green and blue roofs for water attenuation for the actual building itself. Page 77, sustainable design and construction. This is intended to be secured by condition with a carbon offset secured by section 106. Further details of overheating and ventilation to be secured by condition, and that primarily relates to the 5 single aspect units on the front of the building, which are south facing. So I'll come on to this in a moment, but you'll see in the mod sheet that there's a breakdown of which rooms or which units are single aspect and dual aspect. So all units would have a return balcony, providing two sort of angles for light to enter. But it is unavoidable to have some single aspect units unless more stair cores are inserted, which again would mean less affordable housing. So it is a matter of balance. In terms of air quality, biodiversity, these are considered acceptable. We have a landscape and condition to capture urban greening factor requirements. We would require a certificate, a secured by design certificate, to be dealt with by condition. In terms of fire safety, the fire statement confirms acceptability. So the recommendation is to grant permission subject to conditions and a legal agreement. And I'll just take you to the mod sheet for changes to the recommendation, which includes an additional heads of term, which we'd missed out in the report, and that is a contribution of up to 45,000 if the CPZ control parking zone is to be extended, and that's for consultation and implementation. Key things to draw your attention to on the mod sheet. Page 5, additional comments from the agent. So we've had confirmation that all the affordable rent units will be at social rent level. If the committee feel necessary, the applicant would be happy to accept the provision of an on-street disabled parking bay in Chaseside Avenue, and that's in here. So eventually will be opposite the entrance, which provides step-free access. The agent has also come back with a number of options as to how the concerns of transport planning could be overcome. So as I say, that's removing the proposed loading bay in conjunction with a condition which limits delivery times and the length of delivery vehicles. Potentially, if members saw fit, in order to overcome the concern in relation to the width of disabled bays. So the disabled bays are shown at 1.8 meters wide to tie in with the existing parking space, which is a fairly regular approach. Our transport planners have indicated that these should be 2 meters wide at a minimum. So we have a potential condition to add to secure that. The other potential way of dealing with this would be to secure a financial contribution in the region of £10,000 per space to contribute towards accessible transport initiatives in the borough, which is a system that's been used by other London boroughs in lieu of on-site disabled parking spaces. So if I take you to the officer comment on page 7, you can see the servicing requirements for the proposed units would be limited due to its modest size. There would be no overall loss of parking bays. And as I say, if concerns remain in relation to the loading bay, it would be feasible to utilize the existing loading bay, although that does mean walking a little bit further down the street, but it wouldn't be it wouldn't cause an issue of highway safety in any way. In order to deal with this, we advise we recommend a revised condition to ensure that a servicing plan is submitted. This will be discharged in conjunction with the council's transport planner, highway authority, and along with TfL if necessary. Now in the mod sheet, you can see the layout. Unfortunately, that hasn't come out too well on the printout. But it's just to give you an idea of how the parking would be laid out: 3 disabled bays in Rothesay Avenue, and then a section of regular parking bays beyond that. You'll also see that the housing officer has provided some comments, and the applicant has come back on that with details of engagements with various registered providers for taking on board the affordable housing units. You'll see the urban design officer's comments, and then those are his original comments. In bold, we have his extra comments sort of just before the committee. and then with the officer response to each one of those matters. Ultimately, the visual impact is a member for members to balance against the benefits of the development. And obviously, officers have come down on the side that this would be acceptable in visual terms. And then beyond that, you'll see that there are amendments to the plans and documents. So that was to allow the affordable housing units to be identified, so we can see exactly where they will be. The additional heads of terms for up to £45,600 towards the consultation and implementation of a controlled parking zone extension. And then we have a number of additional conditions. The specific wording is not worked out, but the key-ish things that they need to control are the provision of the network rail spaces to be electric charging, and that would be with fast charging ports. Details of landscaping and play equipment, and that is to ensure, well, that the play equipment is acceptable, and also to ensure it's meeting the urban greening factor. As I said, the final details of servicing to be secured by condition. We'll be looking for further details of overheating and ventilation measures, although what is outlined at the moment, it would be acceptable, but we just want to control those elements entirely. Some further acoustic details in relation to the outdoor air source heat pumps and the flats immediately adjacent, including mitigation measures if necessary, which could include additional glazing. A condition relating to the ongoing use of the shared communal space at ground floor level to ensure that that remains available to residents in perpetuity. And then two potential conditions, one for the on-street disabled parking bays to be a minimum of 2 meters in width. Now the other one is about details of doors between the two cores. Having looked into this, it looks like there may be some limitations there to do with fire regulations, and that those doors can't be kept open on a permanent basis. But we can certainly look into that, and if it can be done, we can look into that. Amended condition would just be the drawing numbers condition, and then you'll see there's officer responses to a number of member queries following. So as I say, the recommendation is for approval, subject to legal agreement and condition. Just to leave it in terms of the conclusion, the not so positive aspects of the development are that there are some single aspect units, but that is, justified by the layout of the cores. There would be an impact on neighbours in terms of light, but as I say, that's set out in the report, and ultimately the retained levels of light are in line with what is considered acceptable across London in a number of appeal decisions, and that is vertical sky component in the mid-teens. So the bulk and massing of the building is large, so that's a matter to be taken into judgment. The scheme does facilitate future step-free access, but step-free access itself is not included. In terms of the benefits, contribution towards housing numbers, and in particular affordable housing despite the financial viability, the provision of a new station entrance and the improvement of the facilities there, an employment generating use on site, and the fact that it would facilitate future step-free access. And that is the end of my presentation. Thank you, Chair.
Tim, thank you ever so much for going through such great detail and very succinctly and drawing us to the key points. Really appreciate that. So now we are going to go over to our guest speakers. So I'm going to ask Vanessa and Delphine to speak on this matter, 3 minutes each. So is it Vanessa first?
And my name's Daphne.
Apologies, Daphne.
Okay. Oh, do we do a clock? Oh, we started. My name's Daphne Xenagis. I've grown up in Wimbledon and I'm part of this community. And tonight I will speak for over 150 residents in Wimbledon Chase. To be clear, we're not against development at this site. Our population is growing. You've got a target of 918 homes, but you're behind on this target, and approving the development in its current form will do more harm than good. At double the height of the existing 5-story parade, it is simply too high. It will cast a massive shadow on homes, robbing us of daylight and privacy on both sides of the station, and it will also impact our mental health. The developer's proposal quotes Central London and Merton Town Centre planning policies to justify its height, but Merton's local plan designates Wimbledon Chase as a neighbourhood parade and, quote, not appropriate for tall buildings. The council's tall building paper also states, I quote, new development should not significantly alter the skyline. This proposal does. Wimbledon Chase is also not identified as an intensification area. Therefore, this development works directly against Merton policy CS14. If approved, this development will undermine Merton planning policy and will open the gates to future high-rise developments. We reject the application on the grounds that the development does not match the height of the existing parade. We ask the council to limit the development to the existing parade height. Other Central London policies are used to validate the high massing. The daylight calculation uses Central London allowances, which are inappropriate for Greater London. These calculations are for high-density areas, not a neighbourhood parade. According to the London Plan, developments on public land must provide 50% affordable housing, and Merton Council wants 40%. So we reject the application on the grounds that the developer only offers 20% affordable housing. Merton Council's housing mix requires 33% each of 1, 2, 3 bed flats. DMH2 and H11.3 both state this. This proposal doesn't meet that. 58% are 1-bed units and only 5.5% are 3 beds plus. So therefore we reject the build as it doesn't meet council's building requirements. Merton Council says it places a high priority on making its stations accessible for all, and this is an opportunity for Wimbledon Chase to be just that, more accessible. So the lack of step-free is completely unacceptable. Therefore, we reject the build again as it doesn't offer step-free access, going against London Plan Policy D5, which states that development proposals should achieve the highest standards of accessible and inclusive design. Finally, our pipe work is currently unable to cope with the volume of sewage in the area. Baker's End is regularly pumped out and sewage has overflowed into back gardens many times for many years, and Thames Water has still not solved this issue. The addition of 74 homes will worsen this problem. For this proposal, only a SUDS analysis has been undertaken and no sewage calculation has been considered. In 2009, Thames Water insisted a cesspit be included in the plans for St George's Court, just on the other side of Rothsay Avenue, so that the wastewater could join the sewers at a fixed flow rate so as not to overwhelm the wastewater infrastructure. This requirement was for 14 flats. Where is that requirement for 74 flats? On the other side of the road, 5 meters away. We urge the council to consider these points and to reject this proposal until these and many other issues have been rectified. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you. So the committee will go on longer the more you clap. So thank you very much. So Vanessa, can I ask you to speak, please? Thank you very much.
I'm Vanessa Heaney. I've lived with my family for 11 years on Oxford Avenue, just one road away from this proposed development. The size and bulk of the build is not in keeping with the area in terms of height, weight, or style. The plans lack quality. We point to the urban design officer's comments describing the design as long and slab-like with an overbearing appearance. Many concerns are raised in this report about the design flaws, with ventilation, overheating, and the fact there's only a single lift being among the many issues and concerns. Wimbledon Chase residents are alarmed about the lack of sunlight caused by such a tall building, and this is a big factor for us and should be a big factor for all of you considering whether to approve this development or not. But it will also be a problem for people living in the proposed development too. The build has a high number of single aspect units that do not have windows in their bathrooms, for example, and many on the first floor face directly onto the railway embankment. The Transport Officer's report raises concerns about the safety of residents during the build. There is a high level of risk to the public during the unloading of materials, especially on the corner of Rothsay Avenue and Kingston Road and where the bus stop is. We residents are very worried about the safety issue where the temporary exit is proposed on Chaseside Avenue. The current footway or pavement does not meet safety standards. It is very alarming that there is no feasibility study into how the new station entrance can be achieved without breaching safety standards or causing significant and long-term disruption to Chaseside Avenue residents. My daughter starts secondary school in September. She will need to take the train from Wimbledon Chase Station. I worry about her safety now. But it's not just my child whose safety is at risk. Wimbledon Chase is an important interchange for dozens of children at Ursuline High and Wimbledon College. They would have to pass the railway's preferred construction site on narrow Chaseside Avenue. So dangerous. Many school minibuses in the area use the car park forecourt at Wimbledon Chase Station to pick up and drop children each day, as it's a safe place. Some of the children are just 4 years old. Other school buses use the main stop on Kingston Road. The safety of all these children will be at risk by this proposal. We don't need a high-rise, landmark high-rise to locate Wimbledon Chase Station. Wimbledon Chase is not a town centre. If this planning committee approves this development, it will set a dangerous and terrible precedent. You, all of you on the planning committee, will be responsible for allowing the destruction of our heritage area. You will rob us of our light, our privacy, and the enjoyment of our homes, which we value so highly. The floodgates will open. Just another faceless area.
Thank you, Vanessa. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, everyone. Thank you. So we have 2 councillors to speak on this tonight. So we're going to call Councillor Anthony Fairclough for 2 minutes.
Thank you, Chair. Representing people at planning committee is not an easy job. If an application gets here, the odds are stacked in favour of its passing. And there's nothing untoward with that. It's because national planning rules and because of our planning officers who work with developers until they feel they can recommend approval. And refusing permission is a nuclear option. But there are reasons to do that tonight. There are 4 points that Councillor Wilson and I will raise, and I will look at the first 2. Firstly, the rather worrying statement in para 2.16 of the report. Merton currently does not have a 5-year supply of deliverable housing. Now, this is a significant failure by the council. It might be resolved when the inspectorate completes its examination of the local plan, and the government is currently doing that. So I'd like to ask panel members to reflect on that when they're making their decision. And an application can still be resisted where the adverse effect of granting permission would significantly and demonstrably outweigh the benefits. I'd like to ask committee members to reflect on what they've heard tonight from residents and whether they think that criteria might be met. The application is at least a clear 3 stories higher than the next tallest building, almost double the height. The NPPF provides that an application must respect the appearance, materials, scale, bulk and proportions and character of their surroundings. We can see it in the report. It includes the impact on light levels. The officers are not keen on the height, bulk and massing of this. It's hugely out of proportion. Appropriate height is a nettle that this council will have to grasp at some point. Secondly, I do want to commend officers on pushing affordable housing. I can't remember that happening before. But as the Bushy Road development is a recent example, no registered provider could be found to take on a similar number of affordable units. And the worst case scenario is an overbearing building with no affordable housing. So please consider this when assessing the weight to give to that consideration. And I've got a question for the developer. If and only if you can't find someone to take on the affordable housing units, will you look to amend these plans and reduce the heights? Thank you.
Thank you. And now we've got our Councillor Victoria Wilson.
Thank you, Chair. Firstly, I want to address the point on step-free access. As stated in the modification sheet, the proposed development does not purport to provide step-free access. This is an important point to expand on. We welcome the developer's efforts to consider step-free access. Having engineering plans can make it more likely that central government funding can be secured. This is something Rains Park Station has, which we worked hard to achieve. But Wimbledon Chase can only become step-free if it gets that crucial government funding. Train companies have applied for funding for both stations from the Department for Transport's Access for All Fund, along with many other stations across the network. This competitive process is entirely separate to the decision you are being asked to make tonight. There are absolutely no guarantees the government will provide the money. As someone who's spent the past 5 years carrying my children and buggies up and down station steps, I want to see step-free access as much as anyone. But let's be clear, approving this application does not give this guarantee. Secondly, I want to address the standard of accommodation. 44 of the 74 units will be single aspect, as we have heard, which is something to be avoided and not in accordance with planning rules. Climate change is bringing more intense summers, and the limited ventilation options in single aspect accommodation makes them at risk from overheating. I also want to return to affordable housing, as it's so desperately needed. The policy position is 40% affordable housing, moving to 50% in the emerging local plan. This scheme provides only half that. There seems little point in policy if it's routinely ignored. We all recognise the need for housing, but as Councillor Fairclough highlighted, there is a scenario here where permission is granted and we end up with a 30-metre building with no affordable housing and no step-free access. Finally, turning to conditions, if the application were to be approved. As it's a residential area, could no construction work on Saturdays be considered? Also retaining the trees on Kingston Road. When the council is trying to increase the borough's canopy through planting new trees, it makes no sense to fell mature ones.
Thank you very much, Victoria. Really appreciate your feedback and suggestions for conditions. So I'd like to ask the applicant and agent to speak. So we've got John Murch and then also Patrick Lambury from stakeholder manager from Thameslink. Yep, cool. Who's going first?
Thank you, Chair. Good evening, councillors. My name is John Murch and I'm the planning agent for the application. The scheme before you has been 5 years in the making and evolved considerably over that time. We are grateful to officers for their guidance and working with us to provide a very high quality design. Whilst the building would be taller than its surroundings, the site's location on top of a public transport node and at the heart of a local centre is entirely appropriate. The principle of high density development in this type of location is supported by policy. The scheme will provide a new entrance to Wimbledon Chase Station, and members will hear from the network operating company, setting out the considerable benefits that it will bring to its users. The scheme has also been designed with the full support of Network Rail, who are here this evening. The residential component of the scheme will provide the funding for the delivery of the new station entrance. Due to the height of the station platforms, the central location between the tracks and the distance to Kingston Road, the cost of providing step-free access are considerable and in the region of £9 million. This cannot be met by this scheme. However, after exploring all options extensively, the proposed design now safeguards the future construction of the step-free access without the need for station closure, which could not be the case in the current configuration. An application is with government seeking to secure the funding that would deliver step-free access, and a decision on this is expected in the autumn. In relation to the residential component, the scheme will deliver 74 new homes that will make a considerable contribution to the council's increasingly challenging housing targets. The viability of the development has been reviewed by 2 different consultancy practices on behalf of the council. Both confirm the viability challenges the project faces. Notwithstanding that, my client fully appreciates the importance of affordable housing delivery within the borough. They are therefore prepared to take a commercial view and have agreed to provide 20% affordable housing, including large 3- and 4-bed family homes for social rent. Furthermore, my client has also offered up a pre-implementation viability review, given that the new station entrance would be built first, which would allow improvements in market conditions to capture additional affordable housing delivery. The scheme's relationship with neighbouring properties has been carefully considered. We acknowledge some of the challenges in respect of daylight impacts to neighbouring properties, particularly the Tesco building opposite. However, in relation to that building, many of the issues are caused by the building's design, with habitable rooms set back behind the underneath inset of balconies. Any meaningful development of the application site would therefore have impacts, and the BRE guidance makes provision for this to be taken into account. The officer's report has given careful consideration to all of the relevant issues and recommends permission be granted. We respectfully request that members determine the application in accordance with this advice. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, John. Could I ask Patrick now to speak for 3 minutes?
Thank you. My name is Patrick Labrie. I'm the stakeholder manager for Thameslink, who manage the service that goes to Wimbledon Chase and actually manage the station itself. Currently, the entrance is quite old. It's in poor condition. It has poor lighting, poor flooring with manholes. It has, as mentioned, risk of flooding, and it's an inefficient space, a use of the space. We have to have two lease agreements for the retail unit either side of the entrance, and also makes it difficult for our station team to manage the area because of that. The new entrance will split that lease agreement. So you'll have one separate for the retail unit, one for our staff to manage. In fire evacuation, our staff will be able to only manage people who are at the station, who are using the station, rather than for the retail purposes. It will provide better staff facilities for our staff at the station. It, again, for better lighting, better flooring. It's a safer entrance than the current one. And also, it provides a storage place for the bins and gritting units that are there, which are currently visible when you walk into the station. The other bit talked about is the provision for step-free access. Again, in experience of seeing applications agreed by Department of Transport for funding, the ones with a designed scheme are more likely to get funded than ones without, who are just going to put an application form in. So yes, it doesn't guarantee, but it is more likely, and it is a preferred candidate for the government to provide funding. And as you say, around £9 million for the scheme is a considerable amount. So in conclusion, we support the scheme for the benefit of rail passengers and for our staff, and it's an improvement to a station entrance that wouldn't happen without this development. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Patrick, for giving us your insight. So I'm going to call Councillor Ellen Brittas, who's the Cabinet Member for Transport in Merton, and can give some further light on this important strategic policy area for the council. Stephen.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair, for having me here to speak tonight. Making public transport accessible for everyone and allowing residents with mobility issues to travel is one of the key commitments of Merton Council. We've been working hard to make it easier for people with mobility restrictions to use our stations and to increase the number of stations in Merton with step-free access. The council leader, Ross Garrett, has written to the Transport Minister about plans for the redevelopment of Wimbledon Chase Station. The leader appealed for government to use the Access for All scheme to ensure step-free access to the Thameslink station. Government is continually considering nominations for such schemes, and Wimbledon Chase is one of those nominations, as we have heard, to be decided in autumn. This opportunity to make Wimbledon Chase Station more accessible for the local community should not be missed. Additional housing for Merton residents, wherever that may be, is very welcome, and the opportunity to also improve access for residents with mobility impairments is clear-cut. At Moscow Park Station, we've been working with Network Rail and South Western Railways to make the station fully accessible. The Access for All schemes there has developed plans for a new covered footbridge with full access via lifts, stairs, new lighting and security cameras. I'm delighted that we've been able to bring improvements forward for Moscow Park Station. Tonight, we must needs now turn our attention to Wimbledon Chase Station. Delivering step-free access here will hugely benefit the local community, allowing those with mobility impairments to travel further and more freely, as well as bringing safety improvements to all travellers. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for adding additional insights. So I'm going to now ask Tim to respond to any of the comments and questions raised. Tim, I think also it'd be helpful to explain two particular points. One was raised by Anthony in the sense of the 5-year land supply, and just perhaps explain that to particularly our audience here, but also those watching online, because there's a bit of a complicated issue there. And also perhaps just explain The viability issue, we've heard from several of our speakers tonight about that 50% affordable housing isn't enough. But if you could outline how that has been assured, I'm more than happy to step in and explain why the second assessment was requested, if needed as well.
Thank you, Chair. Just going through my notes to see what to come back on. Okay, if there's any additional points you want me to come back on, please do flag that up. But on the 5-year land supply, if I take you in the report to page 56, the council is obliged to maintain a 5-year supply of deliverable available sites. As we know, the adoption of the London Plan significantly increased this requirement and is known as a step change in housing delivery. Currently, Merton cannot demonstrate a 5-year supply of deliverable housing. In that situation, the NPPF advises that it's what's known as the tilted balance, in that there is a presumption in favour of sustainable development, and development should only be refused if the adverse effect of doing so would outweigh the benefits. In a nutshell, if Merton is not meeting its housing supply, then greater weight will need to be given to the provision of housing in the planning balance. Now, in terms of whether the adoption of the local plan will assist in the 5-year supply, it's not an entirely straightforward answer, because it depends if the council's position on the methodology for working out the 5-year supply is accepted by the inspector. The council has put forward a staggered housing supply, so we wouldn't be meeting the housing supply set out in the London Plan for the first few years, but then the idea is we would be exceeding it in the years to follow. So it does depend if that staggered approach is accepted. My understanding is it hasn't been accepted elsewhere, but you know, the reasons for that are myriad. And now policy team is still working on the basis of this stepped transition. So the immediate the grant of the local plan, or the adoption of the local plan, it's if the staggered delivery is accepted by the inspectorate, then we will be much better in terms of where we are with a 5-year supply, but that remains to be seen. So at the moment, at the time of decision making for this application, we do not have a 5-year supply, which should be taken into account in the assessment. Coming back on the point of viability and affordable housing, there is a policy requirement for certain percentages of affordable housing to be provided. However, and critically, that is subject to financial viability. The idea is to identify what the surplus in terms of profit would be, and then from that you can identify how much money or how many units can be put forward as affordable housing. We had one assessment done on the original scheme, which was for more units. It's been reduced down. That indicated that 5 units could be provided. The scheme is now scaled down, though, due to concerns with bulk and massing. Following that, and in conjunction with discussions with the chair, a further viability appraisal was commissioned. And that's to see, if the people who did the first one, if it's consistent with that, because there are a number of factors which can be altered in the assessments. The second response that came back was very much in line with the first set of comments, in that financial viability is severely limited, to the extent that there would only be a profit uplift of around 60,000 when worked out against the accepted and established methodology. The applicant has taken a view on this and has made an offer of 20% by habitable room, which is set out in the agenda. And so for that reason, officers would recommend that the provision of affordable housing does carry significant weight in this assessment. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. I'm going to ask John Berry, Head of Planning, to come in on that point.
Thank you, Chair. It was actually on the first point about the 5-year housing land supply. I think it's important to advise the Planning Committee that because the council at present cannot demonstrate a 5-year housing land supply, and that is the current requirement of the National Planning Policy Framework, unfortunately, the council's current adopted policies are out of date. And that is why careful consideration has to be given. Now, Tim correctly referred to the tilted balance, and it is still important to look at social, economic and environmental considerations. But what I would say in my experience is that the planning inspectors give great weight to the fact that there is not a 5-year housing land supply. Where I've worked elsewhere in the country, that has actually allowed to the development of some green fields. So it is a major consideration. At the moment, our local policies, we're trying to change that, but at the moment they're outweighed by the national policies because of the changing circumstances in the meantime. So I would advise that members need to give very careful consideration and weight to the fact that we presently don't have a 5-year housing land supply and that this is a brownfield site. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, John, for adding that additional detail. So what now I'm going to do, colleagues, is turn to open the floor for questions from yourselves. So as just a reminder, I'm going to suggest we plan the questions according to the planning considerations found on page 54. So if you turn to there, and I'm just going to run through that list. And then if you have a question on that particular area, raise your hand and we'll do the usual 2 at a time. Don't worry, we'll do an A or B at the end for anything that we do miss and come back to it. I'm just trying something out to structure our questions, and please bear with me and do send us your feedback afterwards. Before we do, Simon, would you like to say something, or you want to speak on the first item?
No, I've got a question. So this is where we're going to ask questions, or we can ask questions of the developer and Councillor Alan Bretis and the ward councillors if appropriate.
Absolutely, yes. So just to clarify, and thank you, Simon, for doing that. So you all can ask questions of anyone who spoke, but they must be factual and through the chair. So, and not an opportunity to extend speaking time. So on that count, so from page 54, starting with the principles of development, does anyone have any questions relating to the station entrance? Ed?
Thanks, Chair. Sort of on the entrance, it would be on the proposal, and I think a question for the gentleman from Network Rail. Are there any other examples where step-free access has been tunnelled through an embankment like that and the costs? We've got this £9 million figure, and I think, and there's no guarantee that this funding will come. So I think it would be useful to know if there have been any other similar schemes around that figure that have been done within Network Rail, just to, if it might know where I'm coming from.
I think that's a valid question. Does anyone else have a question on the entrance? Although, I mean, I think you're more inclining to step 3, but we'll allow it under the station entrance. Tim, do you have any points on that before I ask the applicant to ask that?
No, Chair.
Just double checking. So would Patrick, do you have any view on that, or can anyone from your panel there speak to that point at all?
Sorry, I felt like university challenge there, just kind of consulting. I think Peckham Rye is tunneled under and is an example of that. Now, cost-wise, I don't have that with me, but that's an example of a kind of a similar kind of scheme that's done access for.
Thank you. That's a good answer there. Okay, so next step, provision of housing. So we're talking about the general provision of housing, not the affordable. No, Jill.
Thank you, Chair. It's a question with regard to these bathrooms, these windowless bathrooms, which I find slightly worrying because, as we know, this can cause real problems in terms of damp and mold, which is extremely dangerous. So I just wondered how that's being dealt with in the design.
Thank you. Tim?
Thank you, Chair. Yes, there will be bathrooms which don't have access to an external wall. So they would be windowless bathrooms. Not an entirely unusual situation, given that that there are 2 stair cores, and so it would be impossible to provide every room with an outlook. So it's more the non-habitable rooms which would then be positioned into the middle. It would be dealt with by extractor fans within the bathroom rather than the ability to open a window. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. I think if I was you, I'd probably be more comforted to understand from someone from the design team if they just fed back on that point. Does anyone from the panel just want to raise? I appreciate from your perspective is probably standard and sort of not necessarily addressed normally.
Hi, my name's Adam West from CZWG Architects. As I think you said, as Tim has said, the provision of internal bathrooms in a flatted development, in fact in houses as well, is not that unusual. There would be mechanical ventilation, and just to add that would be part of a system which would ventilate the whole property. It would be called mechanical ventilation with heat recovery, which is a modern way of actually having a more energy efficient ventilation system, which actually transfers that heat and saves it and recirculates that within the property as well, as part of the sort of ventilation system.
So the more you shower, the hotter the room will be, or at least heats up. Okay. Councillor Hicks.
Thank you. I'm changing the subject completely, although I'm entirely with Councillor Manley on this. I'm not sure I've understood this correctly, but if I have, the financial viability assessment said that the profit would be £60,000 on this entire development, and then following that, the developer agreed to more social housing. So we're being asked to decide this, if I've got that right, on the basis it's being built for virtually no profit. Is that what we're being told?
So just hold that there. Does anyone else want to come on that viability point just while we're wrapping up? No. I don't think it's as clear cut as that. Tim, would you like to outline how the viability assessments are conducted?
Yes. So it's based on what is a reasonable developer profit, which is anywhere between 15% and 25%, depending on market conditions. So there will be profit up to 17.5%, but then beyond that, it's the 60,000. So there will be profit, but what is a reasonable risk for a development, and that's how the policy is worded. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. So moving on to the next item. So we've previously talked about the Merton's 5-year land housing land supply. Does anyone want to ask any further questions on that? No? Okay. Simon.
Well, I mean, I think my question on this is for Councillor Allambritis by yourself, Chair, which is why are we in the situation where we don't have the local plan agreed? We didn't start the local plan earlier, which means that we are being told that we have a very strong presumption of approving this. Otherwise, it may be overturned. If we'd had a local plan, it sounds quite likely, we don't entirely know, but quite likely that we wouldn't be in a position of being told that we have a very strong presumption to pass this.
I think that would be a fair question if Councillor Allambritis was the cabinet member for housing. Do you have, so I could regroup with you if you've got a question for Stephen relating to transport when we get to transport. Cool, thank you. Right, so we're now on to housing mix. So does anyone have a question about the mix of housing? Dan.
Chair, so I wasn't quite sure about how these questions would work. On the principle of development, I also had a question on the commercial subheading, if I can ask that before the housing mix. It's if you look at the main body of the report 7.2, it's the first thing underlined.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So on the idea of the commercial space, I note in 7.25 it states that there will be a reduction from 246 to 155 square meter retail floor space. That's, to my calculations, a 37% reduction. So I was hoping you could teach me what's the definition of a marginal reduction, because for me, 37% seems like a lot. And also, is the logic behind this reduction so that there's a more regular footprint, so that you don't have two leases? Is that the reason why this is occurring?
So to summarize, I think the question is the consolidation of two spaces into one actually outweighs the benefit of losing those two spaces and the 30% reduction in floor space?
What percentage decrease allows use of the word marginal to be used in planning? I don't think of losing a third of space is appropriate to describe as marginal. So what is the threshold that this planning team uses to describe something as a marginal reduction? And secondly, am I right in thinking the reason why it's being reduced is that there's a more regular footprint of the way it's laid out?
I think the latter has been addressed, I think, in the presentation, but I think it's fair asking how much weight the officer gives to each of the predicaments there. So Tim, if you wouldn't mind addressing that question, please.
Yes, put simply, the use of the word marginal there isn't a planning related word. It's there is no test for what would be a percentage reduction. It's marginal, so it's more informal language from that point of view. The key element is that a commercial use would be retained. It would have a wide frontage with a shop front, as you say, a more regular footprint. So critically, there is a usable commercial unit that would be retained. There would be some reduction in the overall floor space, but at the moment it is rather the configuration is quite sporadic and not ideal, which is why you have the two sort of separate elements of the same shop. But there isn't a threshold as such. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. So housing mix, Dan, did you have a question on that?
I wanted to ask the applicant about the housing mix. I'm a bit disappointed to see so many studio and one-bedroom flats when a lot of people on the housing list have families and they're crowded into one-bedroom and studio flats. So A, why can't you increase the housing mix? B, during the iterative process, did you see plans that achieved the housing mix dictated by housing policy? And if not, if you didn't see that during the iterative process, did you push back and ask for this housing mix to be fulfilled?
So to summarize there, it's a fairer question maybe, what was the thinking and logic gone into the existing housing mix versus policy? Okay, who would like to answer from the John? Okay.
Chair, thank you. We think that the housing mix in this one is good for the location, because what you tend to find is that you have a higher density developments that are better suited to smaller units for the private accommodation and the shared equity intermediate accommodation within the scheme. What we've tried to do in terms of increase the number of the larger family homes is make sure that they are for the social rented homes, so that we've got the 2 beds, the 3 beds and the 4 beds, they're all for the family homes. And then the higher density, smaller units, the studios and the 1 beds for the private units for people that want to live above the transport hub. Generally speaking, from a planning perspective, that's the way that the policy directs us.
Thank you. That's good to understand sort of the design-led sort of logic that you've outlined there. So actually talking about affordable housing, we're on to affordable housing. And I think we may have a question on the delivery of affordable housing. And from Jill, and does anyone else want to talk about, and Martin as well, and then Simon, in that order?
Thank you, Chair. Experience of living in Croydon for a number of years prior to being in Mitcham dictates this question, really, with no sort of spite or malice intended. Could I seek some kind of written assurance or guarantee that by the end of this build, and knowing that potentially building costs can elevate over time, that the percentage of social housing and affordable housing is adhered to, and that we don't have them coming back at the end of the build saying, oh, actually it costs too much, therefore we are not going to give you that 20%. Thank you.
Thank you. We'll take Martin and then Simon, and then we'll answer with Martin.
Yeah, I just have a question, obviously, in terms of registered providers, housing associations. We did obviously see in the supplementary, you have had talks with obviously a number of housing providers. What has the general feedback from housing providers has been to this development?
Thank you. Simon?
Thank you. My question is broadly on the same grounds, and it's following up from the one from Councillor Fairclough, which is we have had problems with small number of units and finding providers. And what will the developer do if they can't find somebody to take the units?
Thank you. So just to summarise, so it's Jill for requesting further assurance that the 20% at the end of the build remains at 20%, or cheekily may go up. We've got Martin and Simon ultimately talking about understanding further clarification about the engagement with registered providers and an expectation of what happens if a registered provider can't be found. I think on that latter question, I'll ask officers to speak because there's a convention about that. And then we definitely want to hear from the applicant as well, because if there's any additional agreements that may or may not support securing the point about adhering to the social housing. So Tim, would you mind just outlining what typically happens if an RP can't be found?
Yes, thank you, Chair. There are circumstances when a registered provider will find it challenging to manage a small number of units. Quite often they will want entire buildings, but we're looking at pepper potting affordable housing for outmarket housing. And so there is a tension there that we don't want whole sections of buildings or I mean, a whole building is fine because it's providing a lot of affordable housing, but we do want them mixed through the development. So there is a management challenge there. Ultimately, if all negotiations failed, then my thoughts on this would be that a commuted sum would be secured as an alternative to the on-site provision. But that would only be in the case where all other avenues had failed. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very
Sorry,
much.
I forgot one bit. Coming back on the 20% and whether that could go down, that would be secured in the section 106. So were the applicant to make the argument that only a lesser amount could be provided, effectively it would be a new application. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. And I think what would be helpful is just actually to hear from the applicant about what engagement they've had so far with RPs as well.
Thank you, Chair. Would you like me to respond to all three of those questions or just on the RP engagement?
I think the RP engagement at this time, unless you're given a commitment like in cast iron, that I assume, is that a nod or?
Unfortunately, I can't give a cast iron commitment, but I can comment on the engagement we've had with the RPs.
Definitely, yeah, that'd be helpful. Thank you.
Thank you. So my client has appointed an agent to speak to 7 of the very active RPs in Merton. There has been some solid interest from those from at least 2 of those RPs and potentially 3 of those RPs. I think the issue that you have at pre-planning stage is that they don't want to spend too much time looking at development proposals until there is a firm commitment to planning permission in hand for that to go forward, because they have small teams and it's tight on resources. So, but there is firm commitment from 2, potentially 3, as I say, in this scheme for the affordable housing units that we've proposed. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Does anyone have any further questions relating to affordable housing, particularly about the thresholds or anything at all about the mix that's proposed? No? Okay. So design and impact and character and appearance of the area, massing and height. I can predict the hand. Susie.
I'm sorry to be so predictable. Looking at the shots that we were shown tonight, there were an awful lot of pictures of the Tesco block with the flats, which is a 5-story one. But I would like to have it clarified that basically immediately opposite this building is 2 stories, and to either side they are little 2-story residential streets. And that 5-story building, which is referred to as the one which would be the worst affected, stands alone in its size in this area. Everywhere else is at a much more suburban, domestic scale. Would that be fair?
Okay, let's hold that. Anyone have any questions on height or massing? Simon.
Yes, my question's about the I think change of heart of the council's urban design officer. In the original report on page 36, it talks about it not really being satisfactory. It specifically talks about it being too high, whereas when we get to the modification sheet, somehow we've moved to there's the potential to achieve a high density scheme that is taller than its surroundings. I'm not quite sure what that means, but what does that mean? Because presumably there's always a potential to achieve a high density scheme if you build a 9-story building. Has there been a change of mind, and if so, what's been the reason between the two reports from the urban design officer?
Thank you, Simon. I think it'd be unfair to speak for the urban design officer, although if Tim would like to speak on the conversations they've had, that'd be fantastic. And it may be helpful, Tim, just to bring up a picture of the area that you've already done so, just to illustrate, I think, the point that Susie was making.
Thank you, Chair. Unfortunately, I don't have a sort of immediate link to Street View, which I can show you. If I take you to a site plan, I think that might be the easiest way to do it.
That's fair.
Just waiting for the computer to catch up. While I wait for the screen to catch up, to the immediate north, Roversay Avenue, which is characterized by 2-story housing. There is a larger flatted block towards the end of that road, but separated in somewhat of an anomaly. Along the neighborhood parade itself, sorry, bear with me, I'm not sure why we're having trouble. There are a cluster of taller buildings. So there are buildings of a similar height to the Tesco's along, in terrace with the Tesco's building. Moving beyond the neighborhood parade, it is an area of suburbia, which is fair to say. As I said, difficult to comment on the urban design, whether there's been a change of mind. My reading of it is that there's not a change of mind as such. There is an acceptance that a significantly taller building than what exists currently could be accommodated on this site. So there's an acknowledgement that there is scope for a large building here. The palette of materials are supported. The head of the building is generally supported, but it's the length of the body, if you like, of the rest of it, and that leads on to his comments of a slab-like appearance. There have been amendments to try and break up that massing, but ultimately the size of the building is such that it will appear as a large building in its context. I can't really offer any more insight into his comments on that. Thank you, Chair.
No, thank you for just giving us that additional insight and to the conversations you've had, which is helpful. Okay, so anything further in terms of layout or design and appearance, particularly if there's any comments or questions relating to, those who remember the first design versus the latest design. Susie and then Martin.
A question for Tim in relation to the slab-like appearance. There was a picture of the rear of the proposed design, which fully justified what the urban design officer had to say. But I haven't seen a picture, I don't think, of what it would look like with the new attempt to improve it slightly. Do we have a CGI of what's now proposed?
We do have a CGI of the rear. If you bear with me, and I will pull that slide up.
We'll move to Martin in the meantime. Martin?
I just wanted to raise the point that obviously these plans were never considered by design review panel. Obviously, that's a decision of the developers. I'd like to ask why that was the case, because I think they do provide very useful and helpful advice in terms of design across the council. I know planning committee does appreciate their advice, and I just obviously be hearing further about that.
I think that's a fair question to ask our applicant. Would you mind commenting on why the design review panel weren't consulted in this manner?
Thank you, Chair. We did present to the council's design review panel in March 2020. It's obviously going back a fair bit now when we're at pre-application stage, but yes, we absolutely did.
Thank you. Tim, have you managed to?
Yes.
Yeah.
Thank you, Chair. Sorry, Chair, bear with me. We're having some technical difficulties.
It's all right.
With the
Let's
computer.
while you get the computer to say yes, let's move on. So why don't we talk about the impact on neighbouring amenity? So I know there was some comments about daylight and sunlight assessments. Does anyone have any points on that? Susie?
Looking at the mod sheet, I've lost my page now. There's a comment on how they have amended their chart of the VSC readings. I've now lost it. What I haven't got, this may be my fault, is a clear picture of how much the reduction will be for the neighbouring properties. And I suspect there's a lot of neighbouring properties that are going to be significantly affected. And I would love to know more clearly what that will be. I think the information is probably there. I just haven't got it printed off and haven't found it. So I apologise for that.
Thank you. And is anyone else have a question on that? I've got a question. Just building off Susie's point, it'd be good to understand, given that the current building is a single story, would, if you build anything on that site, would it always be measured as significant impact because of the nature of the existing site?
Thank you, Chair. In terms of the impact on specific properties, we've looked to set that out across the report under separate headings in relation to each one. So, and that's page 64 onwards. So you can see that there's sections relating to each unit or each neighbour. The BRE guidelines, if a window is completely unfettered, generally speaking, that has a 40% vertical sky component or a visible sky component is also known as. The idea is that this shouldn't be reduced to less than 27%, and then it would sail through in terms of BRE guidance. What we're looking at is reductions to around the mid-teens, which we've looked at quite closely and had a number of, you'll see this with the next application on the agenda as well, but with a number of appeal decisions which do support values being retained largely in the mid-teens. The assessment on this looks at the impact on those windows. It also comments on some other factors which currently block light, notwithstanding the development, such as the balconies above windows, which mean that the existing vertical sky component is fairly limited. But it is set out for each property in the report. So if there's any specific queries about individual properties, there's no sort of set amount of loss across the board, though it depends which properties it is and which windows are affected.
No, thank you. That's actually, I did know this was there. But mid-teens, is that something which we would normally have in a suburban residential area? Or is mid-teens more appropriate to tall builds in the centre of London? What would normally be the expectation in an area like this?
A number of the appeal examples we've had on other schemes have been in central London. but we have had some which are more Greater London as well. So it is a mixed bag really in terms of appeal decisions. Ultimately, that amount could go down more in a very urban area. So I think some account has to be taken that this is an area that's largely suburban with a cluster of taller buildings around the neighbourhood parade. So ideally, we would like there to be less impact on neighbours in terms of light, but we do recognise that any development of the site would likely impact on those guidelines and result in a lesser amount. I can't say exactly how high it would be before it would fail those tests, but in general terms, yes, an uplift on development on the site. And that is because the guidance works on how much vertical sky component you have at the moment compared to how much there would be. So if you have a very open aspect, that means that the reductions will be proportionately more. I hope that helps. Thank you, Chair.
No, that does. Thank you. And if you could go back to Susie's original question about the improved face of the rib of the building you're putting up the CG for.
No, so this is the CGI of the rear. Did you want to see the elevation?
No, what I was really interested in was what it was going to look like now. There, it is unmitigatedly ugly, but there have been some attempts to improve it, and I just wonder what it looked like now.
Oh, well, this is the
This is the
improvement.
improved one. I do apologize.
Yeah.
Sorry. I
If
think we'll leave
you-
that one there.
The design and access statement, you can see the original scheme had a alternative color at the top and was had a few more sort of various levels of heights. But I don't have a one as part of this presentation to show, but if members would like, we can dig that up from the design and access statement to show it.
No, I think it speaks for itself. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Any questions on overshadowing before we go on to the next section? No? Okay. Standard of accommodation. Does anyone want to ask a question on that? Think about single aspect, dual aspect. Susie, anyone else?
I have to say, I find it very poor that 44 out of 74 units of accommodation will be single aspect. And I am troubled about whether they might just be hot little boxes. And I read the mod sheet about mechanical ventilation being installed, and I would very much hope that is the case. But for me, it remains a concern. And I would like it to be conditioned in some way to ensure that if this is built, those single aspect flats, which are the vast majority, are properly cooled. I live in a house which is southeast facing, and I know how hot it can get. Thank you.
Okay, let's pull that back into comments when we talk about conditions. Tim, it would be good to answer. I think we had some further assurance about the cooling of those rooms. I would like to just understand a bit more how do basic things contribute to the heat of the room, say kitchens, etc., and how does both the applicant's original documentation and also your report, there was obviously a lot of reference and weighting given to some of the balconies as well, and just understand how that plays into sort of the natural ventilation versus mechanical ventilation as well. And I was going to say, feel free to say the applicant needs to answer some of this.
It will be useful for the applicant to come back as they will be closer to the specifics of this element, but I can confirm there would be mechanical ventilation. We are looking for an additional condition to make sure that this is absolutely worked out to the nth degree, and that will be something that we do in conjunction with our climate change officer. All the units do have a return balcony, so they're not single aspect in one plane. So whilst they're still categorized as single aspect, it does allow for some limited degree of cross ventilation. The balconies, which will stand above windows in many cases will provide a degree of overshadowing for those south-facing units as well. But if you'd like to ask the agent further details, and please do so. Thank you, Chair.
I think, yeah, that would be fair. It'd be great to understand further the current measures and how you go about ensuring that post-build as well. I think that's to Susie's point. It's all well and good having a plan and an approach, but how do you measure that to ensure that what you've built meets that standard as well?
Thank you, Chair. I think the only other measure that I'd like to just mention, in addition to the ones that have already been picked up, is the comfort cooling for those units, which is in addition to the mechanical ventilation. So the comfort cooling is part of the building sustainability strategy and will provide cooling for the units at carbon neutral or next to carbon neutral. I think in terms of actually securing this within the development, when you get the decision notice, you carry out the development in accordance with the approved plans and the documents. So the energy strategy that we put forward is part of that. And also the London plan now requires us to revisit the energy strategy once the development is built and report on that as well. So that's my response, Chair. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. So does anyone else have any questions on the standard of the accommodation at all? Cool. No. All right. So I'm going to move on to inclusive design and accessible housing. Anyone have any further questions on this aspect? Thank you. All right. Transport. So within transport, I'm also going to include obviously the step-free access if any specific questions that haven't already been asked on that. So we're talking car parking, cycle parking, deliveries and servicing. I mean, I noted in some of the comments from our design officer about the south stairwell and access in the sense to the cycle units. I don't know if any other colleagues has a question on this either. No, or any transport issue. Yep, Dan.
On page 25, the transport officer talked about car clubs and membership should be offered to residents for 3 years. Has that happened? Is it only one car club space? Can we get the 2? And is there any way we can try and condition for it to be much longer than just 3 years?
Thank you. So any other questions on transport at all? Ed?
Thank you. I did go along to a meeting that the developer held at the station, and one of the problems residents had was the current issue with parking. And I note the offer of money for a consultation, but I think the big problem is a lot of these people are out all day and come back. The existing residents already feel that the developments that have been built in recent years have not addressed the problem, and it's a problem they've got. If they go out, they can't park outside their own houses, and I think residents feel quite miffed that suddenly they can't have friends and family over if a 24-hour CPZ is put in. So whilst it's a gesture to have the consultation, I don't think it's really addressing the problems that the residents have voiced. Thank you.
Okay. I'll probably come back to you in comments about what would address it. And do you have any specific question on that specifically?
Not really. Okay.
All right. So 2 points there. So one about car club membership, and the second, my point about the reference from in terms of plans and access to cycle storage in the south core as well. So if we need to pull the applicant in, by all means, but it's good to understand any conversations or any issues with any of those things raised.
Thank you, Chair. Certainly, we could work into the Section 106 requirements, the provision of a car club for longer than 3 years. 3 years is a standard time that we'd ask for, but I think given the size of the development, I mean, the applicant can answer as to whether that's something they'd be happy to accept, but that would seem like a feasible solution. In terms of cycle storage layout. If I just take you to the ground floor plan. If the computer will work again, bear with me. Okay, so this is the residential entrance to the south core and bicycle storage, and here we have to the north core. Sorry, Chair, could you outline what the query was, and I'll try and answer.
Yeah, no worries. So in the commentary from the design officer, they reference that the south core, you've got direct access to cycle storage from the road, whereas for the north core, for the south core, you'll need to obviously walk into the entrance and then again cycle. I didn't know what any background conversation to this or any issues of that. It was just looking at the design improvement possibilities.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, so as you can see at the south core, there is 1, 2, 3 doors to negotiate to access the bike store. There is some possibility that could be reduced. I think that will have to be something the applicant comes back on in case there's any requirements there. Yeah. Here we only have 1 door. There were some issues raised by the secure by design officer who'd like more, but then the urban design officer who'd like only 1. So there is a balance to be struck there. It may be that the applicant can come back on the removal of one of these additional doors. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Yeah, it'd be good to hear just on how do you see users using this space and accessing these cycles? And, I do note that you've included space for larger cycles, because if families do use cargo bikes, etc., that'd be quite helpful to use that.
Hi, Adam West from CZWG again. Yeah, cycle storage is an issue, and as Tim pointed out, we've got a secure by design officer asking for 2 doors where we've only got 1, and where we've got 3 doors, we're being asked to provide fewer. The reason there are 2 doors into the cycle store at the back is a fire strategy. We have to have a lobby between any space and a protected route to outside from the staircase. So we can't, unfortunately, remove one of those doors. The reason that the bike store is in that location is because there is also a desire to have a more active frontage onto the street, so shop windows and so on, rather than a blank frontage, which is, a wall to a bike store. So that is one of the reasons for it going at the back. The doors are 1200 wide. They're in line. The setting out is all in line with London cycle design standards. So we've tried to make them as good as possible, and we've over provided numbers. And as you say, there are also a good number of larger spaces for cargo bikes and so on.
No, thank you. No, I gamed it out myself, and the only other option I could see is potentially a door that leads onto the station, the entrance itself, but then that raises other issues, because then frankly, a member of the public can come in and then they've got access to a building rather than from the other side. So thank you very much for addressing that. Simon.
Is this the right place for a step-free access question, Chair?
Absolutely.
Great. My question is to Councillor Alan Bretis, since he's been kind enough to join us, and it's about what's happened on step-free access. In February, he was in Wimbledon Chase, which is great, and he made some very positive comments about it, including plus in the near future, more flats leading to a new station frontage and step-free access for all. And I just wanted to understand what had changed from then, when there was going to be step-free access for all, and now when there's step-free access to everywhere apart from the platforms. And I just wondered if you could just tell us a bit about the history of what changed between February and now.
I'm gonna allow that because it goes to timing and discussion and policy.
And nothing has changed. Our ambition is for step-free access at Wimbledon Chase.
Thank you very much. Asked and answered. So Does anyone have any other questions on transport or transport matters, CPZs, or anything at all relating to disabled parking? I mean, I've got a query about, if we are trying to make, go into points before about the attractiveness of the affordable housing, what are the sort of conditions that are being placed on this scheme in terms of removing the right to own cars and various things like this that may impact that or potential in the future? It'd be good to just understand that a bit more. Oh, sorry, apologies, my fault. So just understanding that car ownership impacts the attractiveness of some of these affordable units, given that the target audience of those may need to have a car for work or whatever. What thought has gone into that in terms of conditions and what restrictions are there on car ownerships in the scheme?
Thank you, Chair. The intention is that it is a permit-free development. However, it is within the power of the committee. It would be the norm that any registered disabled occupiers would get access to a parking permit. But in addition, it would be within the power of the committee to allow for the affordable housing units to have access to a parking permit. That would obviously mean some impact on local parking pressure, but it is a limited pressure in terms of the overall development. But that is something that could be worked into the legal agreement. Thank you, Chair. Okay,
if you can go back and talk about that when we talk about conditions in the comments, that'd be great. Super. No other thing on transport. We'll move on now then to flooding and drainage. There was one of the queries that Victoria raised, if I remember, was about Thames Water and requesting a sewage plan. It'd be great for Tim if you'd just understand to share with us, have we got all of the necessary documentation to provide you the assurance that this wouldn't compound the problem, and if there's anything else that you want to add on that matter.
I mean, largely this is a matter that's dealt with under the building regulations. So as planners, we don't have specific technical knowledge of these matters, but they are controlled by other legislation. In terms of Thames Water responses, there's nothing that's problematic within the response. There is a note that there be no construction within 5 meters of a water main, but that allows for redirecting of any water mains should that be the case. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you very much. I may come back to that in conditions. So anything on flooding? No? All right, sustainability. Anyone want to add anything on that? PV, insulation, standards, etc.? Nope. Air quality and contaminated land? Nope. Biodiversity. So I've got a question on that point. I just note that the scheme at this stage doesn't necessarily have things like that we talked about in the past, often swift boxes and insect boxes and things like this. Had there been discussions with the applicant about those potentially being added as a condition?
Thank you, Chair. We do have a condition that the ecological assessment recommendations be carried out, but there's certainly no reason that we couldn't have a specific word in the condition relating to swift boxes and insect boxes, which could be accommodated throughout the build.
Super. It's good to understand how the scheme could add to biodiversity. Any other questions? Susie?
Could we add bats and hedgehogs?
Where would they travel through?
The hedgehogs? I'm not sure, but if there is a wall anywhere crucial between there and Rothsay Avenue, there should be a hole in it.
I'm more focused. I think I'm more inclined to support bats rather than hedgehogs, but I take your point. Let's put it in the conditions. Safety and security considerations. So the design by access officer gave a lot of feedback on this, and we've already heard some of that. Any questions on that? No. And finally, before AOB, fire safety. Does anyone want to raise a point now? I do. I just want to ask a question that Tim, you alluded to earlier on, and it links to obviously the perception of a sort of two-tier this building as well, in the sense of the doors between the cores being secured. You referenced that before. What do you actually mean by that? Do you mean that they're closed and you would naturally open them as you would walk through them, or are they closed and locked? How could you just explain that for us, just to clarify?
Thank you, Chair. It's maybe something that the applicant will need to clarify, but my understanding is that they would remain closed unless in the in an emergency, in which case they could be in use for access. So it wouldn't be permanent access that would be allowed through due to fire regulations. But as I say, the applicant may be able to come back on with some more detail on that. Thank you, Chair.
Super. Thank you. Yeah, could Adam come back on that? Thank you very much.
Yeah. Hi. The door is there for fire reasons. It's to control smoke because it's a corridor linking to cores. So it has to remain closed. It can be fob operated so that people can pass through that door if necessary. There is another issue about potentially management, but there's no reason why that door couldn't be fob operated. And we've certainly said from the beginning that if one of the lifts broke down or if there was a fire and necessitated access through that door, it would fail safe open.
Fantastic. So to summarise then, because I think your mic was slightly muffled, residents could access that via key fob, but ultimately it needs to be secured because of the fire regs.
Correct. Yeah, there's a management issue about the fob, but yes. Fine.
Good. Thank you very much. Okay, so AOB, anything we've not raised that anyone wants to raise? Simon, Susie? Cool.
This is sort of, we'll come on to the next bit, but I just want to check first. Just to come back to the point that Councillor Wilson made about being in a residential area, whether we could say that there wasn't going to be any building work on Saturdays. Is that something that we could add when we come to adding conditions?
I'll take that one. Let's put it into comments and throw it around. But I would, as we've done in previous times, and I'll be grateful to bring the applicant on this as well, those conditions, while helpful on a Saturday, lengthens the build. So there's a trade-off on these things. Susie?
This is something I should have raised right back at the beginning. It's a note I've been passed by one of the residents. I don't think we've seen an image or a CGI of just how top to bottom tall this is going to be from the front. We've seen pictures of the bottom of it and we've seen elevations, but is there a CGI of what it will actually look like when you're standing outside the co-op looking across the road?
Tim,
Thank you, Chair. I can go through the CGIs to show you what we have. I don't know if there's one from that precise view, as they tend to sort of be positioned slightly further down the street. But I'll take you to one where you can see what we have of the front elevation. So almost fitting it in, but that would be well, we don't have one from this view here, but this is the closest view that we have showing the frontage.
Thank you. Sherry-Ann.
Hi, thank you. I just had a quick question, not sure if it's relevant in this section, but is it possible to look at a CPZ exception for the affordable housing element of the scheme?
Well, why don't we move on to comments now, unless there are any other questions? No? Good. So sorry, questions are for councillors, so thank you. Yes, so let's take that as one of the first things to talk about then. So I've got a list of conditions I've taken note, and colleagues do shout I'm relying on you if I missed anything. So we talked about car clubs from Dan, guarantees on affordable from Jill, CPZ, Sherry-Ann, and we also had from Simon about Saturday, and they're just exploring that. Anything else I've missed in terms of conditions we want to throw around? No. Oh, Swift boxes, yes. Sorry, the hedgehog Swift box, yes. Cool. All right. So first things first. Let's talk about CPZ and affordable housing. And we've obviously got the cabinet member here as well. So, Tim, from a practical perspective, could that exemption be made that those in the affordable units would be able to use a vehicle?
Thank you, Chair. In the wording of the section 106, our standard wording at the moment allows an exception for registered disabled occupiers. It would be within the power of the council to include those in the affordable units. John, is there anything you'd like to come back on that, or are you happy with that approach?
No, I don't have anything to add to that, actually, Chair. No, I think it is within the council's power. If that's what the committee want to do, we can write that in via a condition or the legal agreement or whatever's the most suitable means. But that is achievable as far as I'm concerned.
Super. And we're always keen to make sure our conditions are deliverable. So I'm looking for a nod from the cabinet member if that would be possible. There you go. Cool. All right. There's colleagues. Would you see that as something that we could add to the conditions so that those in the affordable housing could potentially use a vehicle if needed? Susie?
I completely see and endorse the idea of an exception for somebody who is registered disabled. But people who are in affordable housing are effectively on a comparable situation to the people who live in the area and have nowhere to park, and the other people who will buy flats in this building who are not in affordable housing who will have nowhere to park. And I'm not completely convinced about the justification of changing the parking, making an exception simply on the basis that people live in affordable housing. Disability, absolutely, but affordable housing, I'm not so convinced. We've heard quite a lot, hasn't been discussed, but there's a lot in the papers about how very, very difficult parking in that area already is. And I don't personally think we should be extending the problems that already exist.
I understand your reasoning there. However, it has been drawn to our attention that much of the larger flats are being dedicated to families. And by dint of that, I would suggest that some families rely on some form of vehicular usage, and wouldn't that not be something we should consider?
Councillor Manley is entirely right. Life with children without a car is exceedingly difficult. So maybe there's a compromise where it's extended to the 3 and 4 bedroom properties, but not otherwise.
Nods I'm looking for? Yeah, so affordable with 3, 4 bed properties. Is that possible?
I think, Chair, that we'd have to, if we go along those lines, we need to make sure that whatever we secure is enforceable. So we'd need to check that with the parking regime, but we can certainly look at it.
So my advice would be, let's have it as, let's note what we've said here. Let's take it away. If we can put that on as a condition from a deliverable perspective, then we've got consent here that that's the direction of travel that will go down. So thank you very much, colleagues. So I believe the next condition we want to talk about was right back at the beginning. We talked about the guarantees of affordability. So Jill, you mentioned that, and I think John talked about 106. Is there anything we want to add to that or talk about that further?
I don't think so, Chairman. Chair, with that would be detailed in the legal agreement, and if there was a variation to that, then there would have to be a variation of obligation application, which we would bring back to members at that time. So I think that's achievable, and that's the outcome we'd seek, and bring it back if necessary, if that wasn't to be the case.
Thank you. That's a good understanding, Jill.
I think let's just make a note how super critical it is, especially as it is being given over to potentially 2, 3, 4 bed dwellings, which we are in very short supply. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Simon.
Sorry, I just wanted to go back to the CPZs. I mean, this is an area of very, very extreme parking problems and shortages. And I think if we're going to go down this route, we need to have a study of each one to see what the effect will be, because whenever you go there, it's a real problem. And I've been up and down those roads an awful lot of times. And I am very concerned about the effects if we suddenly start introducing a significant number of extra cars into that area, however understandable and necessary it might be. So I definitely think if we're going to go down this, we need to have a look at the effects on each area.
Noted. We'll include that when we review that condition. So we've talked about CPZ, talked about guarantees on affordable, and it is super critical. And it's unfortunate that Councillor Manley will be our mayor at the time if that does come back, but I'm sure she'll be sitting on the sides looking on rather than on the benches there. So Dan talked about car clubs. So it'd be good just to refresh what we've currently got in the scheme, what the ask was, and do we get agreement for anything about amending that at all, and also the applicant's view in that as well.
Yes, coming back on that, I don't believe we have got that included, but I think that is an oversight in fairness, and we would have had a car club included as a requirement. As I say, the standard requirement is for 3 years, but I can't see a reason why that couldn't be extended for longer than that. Thank you, Chair.
Can I just bring the applicant in? What are your views on an extension, or what are your views on car club ownership for the build?
Very happy with car club, Chair. It's standard practice and no issue with that. 5 years, would that be reasonable?
Yep, sounds good. All right, so so colleagues, do you want to add a condition on 5 years car club membership? Looking for nods or voices of nods. Fantastic. And two other items to run through. We talked about ecology. So we're on swift bricks and insect boxes, and I think Susie referenced hedgehogs and bats. Susie, do you want to add anything further? No, I'm skeptical on the hedgehog side of things, but I don't know how bats would coalesce with swifts.
We can certainly work into either the existing condition or a new condition to at least investigate the possibilities. Swifts and bats, I think there's certainly an option for. Hedgehogs, it's generally about keeping sort of access to their habitats available and not blocking off the routes. I'm not sure that they'd be looking to move through this development because it's going to be such a dense development. It is next to the embankment, which I imagine could be a key area, and there are residential gardens next to it. It can certainly be looked at as part of the condition. I can't immediately see an area where a tunnel would provide linkage of habitats though, but it's certainly something that can be considered.
Super. And just bringing in the applicant, is there any particular issues on those ecology inclusion?
No issues with those. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Super. And finally, Simon, do you want to talk anything further about the Saturday point?
So the point was about Saturday working, and of course you're right that there's an issue that it makes the build longer, which is the inconvenience over a longer period. I mean, my understanding from Councillor Wilson is that this is something that residents generally would rather have the peace and quiet on a Saturday morning. So I think that's something that I would like us to consider. I just do wonder more generally when we're consulting on new substantial developments, whether it's something we might routinely ask people, residents, about whether they have a view on that. So that's a separate issue though.
I think that's a fair point to add. Can I ask the applicant to talk about some of the practical implications of what restricting Saturday working would do? Would this affect further viability? How long would the scheme go on for? And then I'd be grateful just to bring the residents who've spoken today back in to understand their feelings on that as well.
Thank you, Chair. You're quite right. There is a timing implication for doing that, because obviously if you restrict the hours, and also a cost, generally speaking, the longer the build programme, the more expensive that will be. So when we come to do our later viability or assessments, that may be a factor that counts against future affordable housing provision. I'm just looking down the line just to see if anybody else within the team has anything to add.
I think the only thing I would add is that there's always the possibility of saying there'd be only quiet activities on a Saturday. You know, there are things that can be done, painting inside when you get to the right stage, and other things which shouldn't be precluded on a Saturday, I wouldn't have thought.
So just to summarise then, some of the obviously the piling and heavy stuff, you could restrict to Monday to Friday, and as you get the internals sorted, that's obviously, we can work from there, and obviously they're quiet and no one's, okay. Simon, is that articulate?
That's fine, great.
Yeah. So, I'd like to bring John in first and then the residents.
Yeah, just thinking along those lines, actually, I have used a condition in the past that relates to no use of heavy machinery and equipment to address that problem. So to keep the noise manageable. So actually, yeah, again, we can apply that condition.
Super. I'd like to ask the residents who spoke today, just, you know, I appreciate your current views and what you said on record, but would that condition of no heavy machinery on a Saturday, would that be supported by yourselves? Okay. I mean, so colleagues, we've heard the views of everyone. I mean, I'm going to slightly take probably an unpopular view, but I need to sort of consider the scheme and the round, and I have a concern about the effect on the late stage viability review as well. So I'm minded to support the condition of no heavy machinery, because that seems the best compromise, whereas that would enable soft stuff and internals to be done. Does that work for the applicant? Nods. Good. Super. All right. Have I missed any conditions out, or anyone want to raise anything else? Dan.
Just on the car club membership, am I right in thinking the type of car club membership is one where there'll be a dedicated parking space for the residents? Is that the type we have here?
It can be, but again, bear in mind that reduces the space for a resident. But as in, you know, I think that'll be part of that work to put it in, because you'll need you would need to actually be able to get the car. So there may be one locally or not. We just need to look at that. Yeah. Okay. Does anyone have anything else on this? Any further last minute comments? Susie.
One last one. I'm just not sure whether we condition this or not. I've seen comments about the need to condition the landscaping so that whatever is dealt with is properly dealt with. Can we add that?
That's a fair point. Tim, could you just remind us about that condition?
It is one that we have in the mod sheet, but we haven't worked out the specific wording for it, but it is certainly intended to be captured. Thank you, Chair.
Yeah, my understanding of that condition would be that the service charge will pick up ongoing maintenance of that greening. Okay, colleagues. So I appreciate everyone's bear with us. Tom.
Sorry, Chair, just to say, due to something declared in my written interests, apologies I forgot to mention earlier, I won't be voting, and that's why I haven't taken part in the debate, but I just wanted to flag it before the vote.
Thank you for drawing it to my attention now, and understand these things sometimes do happen. Does anyone else? Okay, so Simon, final word, and then we'll move to a vote.
Councillor Wilson mentioned trees and the trees on site and keeping trees. Is that an issue? Could you just remind us where we are on that, please?
I believe they were being retained, but Tim, correct me if I'm wrong.
If I take you to the section in the report, if you bear with me, I just looked that up. There are some a scattering of trees on site. They're to the peripheries, really tying in with the sort of the embankment. So no trees would need to be removed, but there is a requirement to prune back some, and then also tree protection measures for the street trees, existing street trees, that is.
Yeah, that's fair. Okay, so again, thank you very much everyone for bearing with me and going through in such detail. But I feel we've definitely aired all the issues and can't be we definitely didn't rush this decision that we're taking now. So I'd like to move to a vote on the recommendation that the officers have made, in addition to those conditions we've just run through now. So I'm not going to ask colleagues in the following order who are voting against, not voting and for. So all those voting against. Sorry, we were commenting before. Did you want to have a period?
That wasn't quite how I understood it.
No. I would like the opportunity to comment. I imagine others would as well.
Fine, comment. So let's,
Yeah.
Susie and then Simon.
I'll be very brief. This is a brownfield site. I really, really, really want to see accommodation built in Wimbledon. And I'm sure that Councillor Manley will hate me for what I'm about to say. But this is a residential suburban neighborhood. I know it really, really well. And the tallest building there is 5 stories, and this is 9. And we have no CGI, which shows you what it will actually look like when you're standing there and it's towering over you 9 stories high, 4 stories higher than the nearest building, the nearest tall building, and there aren't very many of those. And that, for me, says this is an opportunity lost. There's also quite a lot of other things which I think are wrong with it. I am very unhappy about the 44 single aspect small flats, and I'm not convinced that it's going to end up, much as I wish it to, if it's built with any socially rented housing, because we don't have any evidence of what's actually going to happen. We just have good words. So for all those reasons, I think this is an opportunity missed, and it is going to be so damaging for the area that it's one, despite the tilted balance, where we should say, go away and come back with something which is 5 or 6 stories tall and fits into the locality and works for all the people who live around it, whose lives are going to be significantly impacted by the loss of sunlight. Let's not make any bones about it. It may be normal in central London to have very little light. This is not central London, and people are used to having 40% PSC, and now we're talking about the mid-teens, and that's not something I think we should lightly disregard. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Please hold your applause. Simon.
We've had an immense amount of spin about this application. We've had a huge amounts of talk about step-free access, and it turns out in the modification sheets that we're told there is step-free access everywhere apart from the platforms. I mean, it really is as useful as a chocolate teapot. Quite extraordinary. It's a tall building. It goes against our own council's tall buildings policy, which is not to have tall buildings in areas like this. Our own urban design officer has said it's not appropriate, and that's why I'll be voting against it.
Thank you, Simon. Ed and then Michael.
Thank you, Chair. I made some notes, and basically I am in agreement with Councillor Hicks, really. I think the 44 flats with single aspect are going to be hot boxes. I've recently dealt with somebody last summer that ended up in hospital from dehydration because they couldn't open the window, and that's a very modern design. It's less than 5 years old. So it does give me great concerns. I think the loss of daylight, sunlight is a real concern. I'd love to see the site developed, but we keep hearing there's a benefit to residents of Wimbledon Chase. I don't think this is a benefit. I think 5 or 6 stories, perhaps there's an opportunity there, but I think it's going to be a real impact on residents of Wimbledon Chase. So I'll be voting against it.
Thank you, Ed. Michael.
Thank you, Chair. I feel this committee have always done our best to strike the right balance between bringing housing we so desperately need to the borough, whilst putting conditions in place to ensure the best development possible for both new and existing residents. I find it unhelpful and ironic that some would criticise the council for not building enough housing while asking us to deny an application that would do just that. As the youngest person on this committee, to many young people, the idea of owning a home in Britain today is a myth. Whilst I find the development far from perfect, not least the lack of a cast iron agreement on affordable housing, I am still erring to a favourable position, as I don't feel deferring will help. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Shariam.
Just to say thank you very much to everyone who took the time to engage with the consultation process. And I've had a lot of residents write to me about this, both positive and negative. And I like the fact that there's 20% affordable. I do commend the internal processes that did make this happen. I like that we're building on top of a station. We do need more of that. I'd also like to say that this is an issue that has come up again, which is that 9 stories is 9 stories, but you have to build higher in order to get affordable housing. You can't just have 5 stories, as much as it may be beneficial to the surrounding residents. You can't have that and then also have affordable housing in a block. In terms of recommendations for the developer, if this were to be granted permission, I just encourage you to engage the services of a specific dedicated residence liaison during construction times, because local residents have raised some really important points about highways impacts, especially with heavy lorries and everything going up and down, quite sensitive transport site. But overall, I am minded to approve this application. Thank you.
Thank you. I was going to just add some my own comments, but briefly there, Sharon mentioned something that we've not actually addressed and we didn't actually talk about in great detail, which we should have, was actually a point raised about a condition for a resident liaison officer. So, Tim, I don't know what details we've already got of that already in the scheme, or if the applicant wants to outline the methods of how the community will be engaged during the build as well.
Chair, I have applied that condition before to have a local liaison group. Yes, we can achieve that. That was accepted, and it worked well actually. And there were meetings on, I think it was either a monthly or a bi-monthly basis. So yeah.
Super. I'm seeing nods.
It's fine, Chair. Where I've used it before as part of the construction management plan for the building, that we would provide details on how we would consult with the local community as part of that.
Yeah, fantastic. Just colleagues, before it would go into the condition, does everyone agree with that? Nods. So that would go into the construction management statement anyway, but it is just conditional, so it guarantees it. Fantastic. Thank you very much. My final comments then. So this is a really, really valuable site, and it's a site that that rarely comes up in the proximity to the station and obviously the neighbourhood. And I echo a lot with colleagues who support the need for more mixed and vibrant housing in an area. A bit of history on things. So Tim mentioned before about viability, and similarly, like many in the public and colleagues on the desks here would think that such a build would produce more affordable. And I asked for that second look again, that second independent look, and we knew the results. And I'm very grateful that the scheme has come forward with such a high level of affordable housing. I can always ask for more, but it's really grateful that we've got that, and that the mix is actually, as the affordable housing officer said, to the benefit of the socially rented units as well. Given some of the changes latter to the scheme. And from reviewing the design from the initial conception that did go to DRP to now, I'm personally a fan of the Art Deco. I enjoy the changes that have been made and has come through. There are questions about whether one would do more detailing about the windows and various things, and this has come through in a lot of the resident comments. But the fundamental thing here is, as John and officers referenced before, 5-year land and housing land supply. We do need to build quality homes. We need to build a mix with affordable in them, and we need to build homes that relate to the user's needs and not just always standards. And this, I feel, provides a good mix of homes and meets those criteria. And I'd just like to thank everyone, the residents, for their engagement, their consultation, and obviously the applicant and everyone coming here tonight before we proceed to a vote. So if there's nothing else, I'd like to ask those who are, so on the question on the paper plus the conditions that we've already discussed, all those voting against the scheme to raise their hands. 1,
3,
2,
Chair.
3. All those not voting?
1, Chair.
All those voting in favour?
6, Chair.
It is carried. The scheme has been approved. I'd like to thank everyone. We're going to take a short break, but what I'd like to do is everyone in the public gallery to exit first, and then the committee can exit, and we'll take a short break of 10 minutes. Thank you very much. Thank you. I appreciate this causes heated emotions, but if you can please vacate, that'd be fantastic. It is actually. So, anyway.